This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South Africa finally gets its first batch of coronavirus vaccines with plans to inoculate health workers first. Burials take place across Somalia for victims of Al-Shabaab's latest attack on a hotel in Mogadishu. And an immediate political shakeup follows a military takeover in Myanmar. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria's food import bill soars despite the country's measures to boost local production. And Airtel to focus on expansion in existing markets in Africa. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, in our top story, we start with some good news coming out of South Africa. The first batch of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines from the Serum Institute of India have arrived in Johannesburg. The first group to receive the vaccines will be health workers. South Africa's Health Minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, says an estimated 1.25 million health workers from both the public and private sectors will be vaccinated. The South African government had been heavily criticized for its slow response in acquiring vaccines, but the arrival of this first consignment brings hope. South Africa has battled to bring the second wave of infections under control. In total, South Africa has registered close to 1.5 million cases, the highest on the continent. Over 40,000 people have died, but 1.3 million people have recovered from the virus. More details on this coming your way shortly. Now, the Africa CDC has formed a committee of experts to expedite its COVID-19 vaccine approval process. The committee includes national regulatory authorities from across the continent. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Africa CDC has asked global vaccines manufacturers to send a detailed description of their products to its expert committee. Africa is already eyeing on at least 670 million doses of vaccines from multiple sources, and negotiations are pending for more. But vaccines approved elsewhere still undergo review in Africa. The African Union, mainly through its Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, approves candidate vaccines for member states to use. And that job will now be done by the AU's expert committee.
We are saying that vaccine manufacturers should share their dossiers with us as soon as possible so that the process is not delayed. So, say, for example, AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna, if they were to export vaccines to the continent, you send us your dossier. This expert committee will review that. And it's an expert committee that includes national regulatory authorities across the continent and outside the continent. They'll review those and then provide their expert opinion on it. I think that is a process.
Most African nations are yet to receive their first batch of vaccines. Africa CDC advised AU member states to start planning for manufacturing COVID-19 related medical supplies locally to combat the virus.
In the post-COVID reconstruction of Africa, in the area of public health, we have to emphasize the ability to produce these interventions locally. That is the oxygen, the vaccines, the drugs, and the diagnostic. But they are not there. We are building it and using it as to fight the pandemic as we go forward.
The continent's health body plans to vaccinate at least 60% of the population to create herd immunity as soon as possible. Still, many fear Africa may fall far behind in the race to secure vaccines. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, Ghana has reintroduced restrictions on funerals, weddings and other social gatherings as the country records a surge in COVID-19 infections. Now, this comes months after lockdown measures were lifted. The government hopes the new restrictions will limit the spread of the virus. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Health officials say Ghana is now recording at least 700 infections of COVID-19 daily. This is a significant jump from the 200 daily infections the country was recording a couple of weeks ago. Ghana says it has also recorded the new strains of COVID-19, and this could be contributing to the rapid spread of infections. President Akufo-Addo says it has become crucial to reintroduce the ban on large gatherings of people at ceremonies such as weddings and funerals.
The imposition of restrictions on our daily routines helped in reducing the prevalence of the pandemic in the country. And government has been left with no option but to reintroduce some of these restrictions in order to help save the situation. I know these measures in the recent past were unpleasant, but over a period they resulted in a favorable situation for the country. We have to return to them.
President Akufo-Addo says private burials with only 25 people will be allowed with the adherence of safety measures such as social distancing and the wearing of face masks. Ghanaians, however, have divided opinions on whether the renewed restrictions on large gatherings are necessary.
I think it's good for the country because the total lockdown will not help us with the economy. With our economy, it won't help us. So the ban on the social gathering is okay.
My business, we sell musical instruments. So it's like we are in the entertainment field. So when you ban maybe social gathering, it affects us a lot.
The government has urged people to continue wearing face masks and observing the COVID-19 safety measures. It also says it is in the process of buying at least 17 million doses of vaccines by the end of June. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Tunisia has the second highest COVID-19 death rate per capita in Africa. That's according to the representative of the World Health Organization in Tunisia, Yves Souterand. Tunisia expects to receive over 500,000 vaccine doses by the end of February under the global COVAX initiative. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi spoke to the WHO representative. Here are more details.
Yves Souterand said Tunisia is facing an unprecedented rise in fatalities and infections. Souterand shed light on the importance of increasing efforts between the World Health Organization and the North African state to combat the spread of the pandemic.
The current situation of the COVID-19 pandemic is very worrying in Tunisia. All the indicators of the epidemiological development are alarming. We are closely working with the authorities to avoid further pressure on the Tunisian healthcare system because it could be affected considerably. We want to provide the means to avoid the spread of the infections among the population, to respect the health protocol and to make the people aware of this threat in the country.
The WHO representative added that the COVAX facility, which includes 190 countries, aspires to provide vaccines for 1 billion people worldwide before the end of 2021. COVAX gives middle-income countries, including Tunisia, and low-income countries the opportunity to obtain the vaccine at subsidized prices or free of charge.
We want to assure that Tunisia is ready to access the vaccine. It's a complicated problem at the logistical and organizational level. The health system must be prepared. The WHO's initiative to provide vaccines to the world population, including Tunisia, is challenging. 20% of the most vulnerable people will be vaccinated by the end of 2021. The WHO will support Tunisia in benefiting from this initiative.
The Minister of Health said Tunisia has completed the paperwork to join the COVAX facility.
Tunisia will buy the vaccine from different laboratories. The results are very promising. We started the procedure in October. The vaccines are not always available because we are part of the global COVID-19 vaccine race. The COVAX facility is an important initiative by the WHO. It will help Tunisia and other African nations control the pandemic.
According to the WHO office in Tunisia, the implementation of the COVAX initiative is facing many difficulties, including an imbalance in supply and demand in the global vaccine market. In fact, some wealthy countries have acquired more vaccines than they need. The number of low and middle-income countries targeted by the COVAX initiative is about 90 out of 190 countries. Tunisia and the World Health Organization will step up coordination to speed up the supply of COVID-19 vaccines. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Israel is extending its third national lockdown to Friday. Now, this comes as coronavirus variants from other countries offset Israel's vaccination drive, sparking fears they may slow down the nation's recovery. Stephanie Fried has more.
Ministers are going to re-meet on Wednesday evening to discuss a lockdown, but right now people are considering it to be somewhat of a joke. They're saying that this isn't a lockdown. You see behind me, this is a cafe. That type of gathering, technically during a lockdown, shouldn't be happening, but there are a lot of things that are happening right now that, quote unquote, during a lockdown shouldn't be happening. People aren't as much afraid as they are angry. There were 2 funerals held within Israel's ultra-Orthodox religious communities. Tens of thousands of people attended those funerals. During the lockdown, only 10 people are supposed to be gathered at one time together. The head of the police said we couldn't curb it because if we'd stepped in to stop this mass funeral gathering, there would have been bloodshed, and that's why people are angry. Because they're saying, why are there certain rules for the religious or ultra-Orthodox community, but those rules don't apply, let's say, to the more secular community that you're seeing behind me? The rules, as the country understands them, Israel's headed into an election in March. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the longest-serving Prime Minister in the country's history, he wants to be re-elected as Prime Minister. And who are his partners, his strongest partners in his coalition to build a government? Religious parties. And so many are saying that a blind eye is being turned to the ultra-Orthodox communities whose schools are still open and who are attending funerals in the numbers of tens of thousands of people together, many who aren't wearing masks.
In international news, Myanmar is seeing a political shakeup following a military takeover which saw Aung San Suu Kyi and other elected politicians detained over alleged election fraud. At least 24 ministers and their deputies have been terminated from their posts, while over 10 people have been named as replacements. Troops are now patrolling major cities, communication lines are limited, banks have been shut down, and residents have rushed to stores to stockpile food and other daily necessities. The top army general has been put in charge of the country under a 1-year state of emergency. Well, China has called on all parties to resolve their differences under a constitutional and legal framework. CGTN's Yu Yang speaks to an expert on Asian studies about future prospects for the Southeast Asian country.
Myanmar's military said they have taken control of multiple governments and parliaments in many parts of the country. In response, China's foreign ministry is calling for the Southeast Asian country to sort out the issue.
China is a friendly neighbor of Myanmar and hopes the various parties in Myanmar will appropriately resolve their differences under the constitutional and legal framework to protect political and social stability.
Song Qingrun, a Chinese expert on foreign affairs, says the military's move comes due to their dissatisfaction with last year's parliamentary elections.
Myanmar's armed forces believe there was massive voting fraud during the parliamentary elections. They had demanded the postponing of new parliamentary sessions, but the Union Election Commission dismissed the allegation last week. That is why they made their move.
Military officials say they will rerun the multi-party general elections after 1-year state of emergency, which was declared earlier in the day, has ceased, and will subsequently return state power to the new government. They added that the country's Union Election Commission will be reformed and the electoral process will be reviewed. But Song says whether the military's plan could be implemented as it is scheduled remains unknown.
The first challenge is the coronavirus pandemic. Currently, Myanmar has over 140,000 confirmed cases and has reported around 400 to 500 new cases every day. So controlling the pandemic is the first issue on the military's plate. They also need to ensure economic recovery. How these issues are handled will show how Myanmar citizens will respond to military rule.
The ruling NLD party, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won the majority of seats in both houses of the Union Parliament in the general elections last year. But Song says Myanmar has a complex society in which, while the NLD has support, cannot have complete support.
The Myanmar military has immense power. It is not only an army, but also a kind of political force. It has large influence on the country's politics, economy, and society. But as we can see, the NLD party also enjoys much support. So, it is quite difficult to say how the situation will develop in the future. It depends on whether the supporters of the NLD will decide to demonstrate, as well as how the military will handle the country's many issues.
Experts say Myanmar's military will be facing pressures from the NLD supporters and some Western countries. So how the situation will unfold in the future in light of these challenges remains to be seen. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Hope for Libya as the UN hosts the voting process for an interim government. And South Sudan approves a hybrid court to try suspects of war crimes. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. South Sudan's government says it has approved the establishment of a hybrid court to try suspects of war crimes committed during the country's 6-year civil war. The 2018 peace agreement demands that a hybrid court be formed in South Sudan to try and get justice for victims of violence. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says it will now begin setting up the hybrid court. The 2018 peace deal dictates that a court be established in Juba comprising judges from South Sudan and selected African countries to try suspects of war crimes in the country. The peace accord also requires the transitional government to establish a reparation commission. The commission is expected to compensate those who lost property between 2013 to 2018 as a result of the civil war in South Sudan. The war was between the government and opposition group led by the current Vice President Riek Machar. One of the priorities of the new government is to promote peace and reconciliation. Juba is expected to form a number of commissions to try and provide justice for victims.
Minister of Justice was asking for an authorization, and the cabinet approved the presentation and authorized him to start the process of the establishment of all these institutions in accordance with the provisions of the agreement.
The 2018 peace deal says the African Union will supervise the establishment of a hybrid court in Juba. The AU says it welcomes the approval to set up a hybrid court by South Sudan's government. The UN says nearly 400,000 people have died in the 6 years of conflict, and that 4 million South Sudanese people were forced to flee their homes. Some have become refugees, while others are internally displaced, many of whom say they hope the establishment of the hybrid court will bring justice in the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Burials have taken place across Somalia after militant group Al-Shabaab launched a deadly siege on a popular hotel in the capital. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has the latest on that attack in Mogadishu.
Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble leads the nation in prayers for retired General Mohamed Noor Galal, one of several people killed in Sunday's deadly attack in Mogadishu. Militant group Al-Shabaab has claimed credit for the attack on Hotel Afrique, a popular hotel located along a strategic road that links the city to the country's biggest international airport. A suicide bomber rammed an explosive-laden vehicle outside the hotel before heavily armed attackers stormed the facility, laying a siege that lasted for almost 8 hours. Al-Shabaab says its target was the retired general, accusing him of spearheading a major campaign against the group for years.
9 people lost their lives and more than a dozen hospitalized with injuries. 4 attackers carried out the attack. 1 was a suicide bomber and 3 were killed inside the hotel.
Elsewhere, these families mourning the loss of loved ones killed in the attack. A pair of newlyweds were on their honeymoon. Their wedding took place at the same hotel 9 days ago.
My daughter's name was Faria Ali Omar. Her husband's name was Fahad Abdirahman. We celebrated their wedding there last week. 9 days later, they are gone. We are hurt and we pray to God for comfort.
The Somali government has condemned the latest attack, vowing to punish the perpetrators.
We will win the war against insurgent groups. The attack here is a testament that the group only attacks innocent civilians. We reiterate our commitment as a government to ensure security for our citizens improves.
It's the first major attack by the Al-Qaeda affiliate so far this year, and comes as the country prepares to go to the polls to elect new lawmakers and a new president. In recent weeks, clan elders and opposition candidates have been meeting at Hotel Afrique to strategize on the way forward. Meanwhile, Al-Shabaab group has threatened to disrupt the upcoming polls, vowing to target clan elders, electoral delegates, and candidates running for elective posts. In December last year, the Somali Prime Minister survived an assassination attempt after a suicide bomber set off explosives outside a packed stadium in the central Somali town of Galkayo. The attack killed scores, including senior army officers and civilians. In the next 3 days, Somali leaders will be gathering in the Somali central town of Dusamareb in an attempt to strike a last-minute deal on the national elections that have been delayed several times in the past. Meanwhile, experts were warning authorities that they must ramp up security measures ahead of the crucial vote. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Libyan delegates have gathered in Geneva to elect a temporary executive authority. Now, this comes after the UN support mission in Libya announced the candidates for that interim unity government that will manage the country until general elections later this year. The 45 candidates are competing for posts in Libya's presidential council and for the post of prime minister. The UN is hosting the voting process in Switzerland this week until the 5th of February. Here's Adel Al-Makhraoui with more.
Libya is on the brink of a major political breakthrough. For the next 5 days, the United Nations support mission in Libya will be hosting the voting process to appoint an interim executive authority to govern the country until December's general election. Politicians from the Libyan Political Forum will be selecting members for a new presidency council and the prime minister for an interim unity government.
If a consensus is reached, this will be a step forward. It will not be a conclusion to the Libyan conflict. It is still important because it will highlight to the Libyan public that these names will lead Libya during the next period.
The UN mission's announcement and the voting are among the final steps in Libya's political marathon, which aims to form a presidency council and an independent government. They should live up to the tasks assigned to them. The most important is the general elections on December 24.
During the rather complex voting process, the 24 candidates running for the presidency council will be divided into lists. Each must have a head for the council and 3 deputies, one to represent each of Libya's 3 geographical regions. Once that is settled, Libyans participating in the vote will choose a prime minister from a list of 21 politicians. The person should come from a different region than the head of the presidential council.
This is a colonial inherited regional division to Libya. We should get rid of it instead of making it a foundation for distributing positions. It is unfortunate that it exists. However, we shouldn't focus on that concept during this stage. The main achievement is to form a unity government, and we should focus on making that successful.
The candidates come from different ideological and political backgrounds. This means that there will still be room for disputes to erupt between the elected and the other factions. Therefore, I believe the political process needs more popular support to succeed.
Aqila Saleh, currently the Speaker of the Eastern-based Parliament, is among the top candidates to lead the Presidency Council, while the scale for the Prime Minister's vote could tip in favor of the Western-based Government of National Accord's Interior Minister, Fathi Bashagha. Adil Al-Mahroui, CGTN.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria's food import bill soars, and that's despite the country's measures to boost local production. And Airtel to focus on expansion in existing markets in Africa.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off in Tunisia. The country will issue debt worth up to $3 billion this year, and that's all part of its wider economic reforms. Now, Tunisia will also roll over some existing credit arrangements. The measures are projected to cut the high public wage bill and subsidies and restructure poorly performing state-owned companies. Now, the budget deficit is estimated at 11.5% of the country's total output or GDP, while its debt is at 90% of GDP. Finance Minister Ali Kouli has, however, said that the country is not in a bad position and will continue to pay salaries and meet its obligations. Of course, Tunisia is seeking a new $1 billion loan guarantee arrangement from the United States. The minister says it will help the country secure the $3 billion in bond issuance. And to Nigeria now, the country's government spent $4.65 billion on food importation, and that's between January and September 2020. That is a 62% rise compared to the previous year. Well, CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports that the increase in food costs was despite the West African nations imposing a land border closure, which was aimed at boosting local production.
Samuel Ayongo runs this farm in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. The 3-year-old farm houses various kinds of livestock, from birds to pigs, fish and snail. Samuel's greatest profits been from his poultry section. Demand rose by about 40% since the border closure, but factors such as high inflation continue to hamper his production expansion.
We do buy to compound their feed, everything skyrocketed to a lot of money. So that really costs a lot on the farm. A ton that you used to maybe the corn and other additives that you can use about 50,000 naira to get a ton of it for as feed. Now you are spending up to 80, 90, in some cases 100 to produce just a ton of feed. So it really costs a lot on the farm.
Nigeria shut down its land borders in August of 2019 to boost local production and reduce importation. But smuggling has been on the rise. The country's food import bill spiked by 62% in 2020 to hit $4.65 billion, a problem that's constantly threatening economic growth.
We didn't sustain the border closure long enough to be able to actually totally harvest the gains of border closure before reopening it again. You must realize that for every product you import into Nigeria, you have exported jobs out of Nigeria. You're exporting jobs, you're exporting our opportunities, you're exporting our wealth. We don't want to look at even the capital flight that goes into importation, especially considering the current foreign exchange position. With that trend, our GDP will suffer adversely. Job creation, of course, is a no-brainer. It's not ever going to improve because local production is what enhances job creation, not importation.
Besides the border closure, there have been several government interventions in agriculture aimed at boosting local production. But that hasn't yielded the much desired results. The West African nation still unable to feed itself and has relied on costly imports to fill the gap. Experts suggest government should consider a policy review in the agricultural sector.
The modern trend, the current 21st century, the fourth industrial revolution that is upon us, technology trends and everything all in one, pushed out as a major public enlightenment package nationwide, very critical. Followed up immediately with capacity development, skill and vocational development across board, which is also very, very much missing. And as you're doing that, the next thing that requires is to equip these guys, to provide equipment. And in providing the equipment, you now look at the infrastructural gaps, the mechanization gaps, and fit them in quickly.
According to the World Bank, agriculture accounts for 34% of employment in Nigeria. Industry players are optimistic the sector can employ more people by ramping up local production. But reopening the borders could be counterproductive. They want government to block smuggling channels and adopt the right strategies to implement agricultural policies. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's now revisit our top story this hour. We began with some good news out of South Africa, where the first batch of COVID-19 vaccines from the Serum Institute of India arrived in Johannesburg. The country has battled to bring the second wave of infections under control. In total, South Africa has registered close to 1.5 million cases, the highest on the continent. Now, over 40,000 people have died, but 1.3 million have overcome the virus. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
South Africa's first batch of COVID-19 vaccines from India touched down at Johannesburg's OR Tambo International Airport. President Cyril Ramaphosa was on hand to receive 1 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca jabs, designated for healthcare workers.
As a country, we've estimated 1.25 million of health workers, both for public and private sector, need to be prioritized.
We've lost a lot of healthcare workers. They were constantly in the firing line. And, all we could do is clap hands for them and basically continue to put them through a lot of trauma, mental health risks, and many of them have died. So this is the first tangible way to demonstrate that support.
It's been a long wait for frontline staff in the eye of the coronavirus storm for close to a year, but there's some anxiety around the vaccine.
I've got those mixed feelings because I need to know more about this vaccine, what it will do and what are the side effects, because it's a new vaccine. I, for one, am very scared. Every time when I come here, the only hope that I have is God, that I know He will protect me where He needs to protect. But it's scary.
The shots will undergo intense verification and quality checks over the next 14 days before a mass vaccination program kicks off. But ordinary South Africans too have mixed feelings.
I can't say that I trust it because I have never seen it working in South Africa. It's the first time it's coming, and we don't even know how it's going to react to people who are already have the virus. So we will see about it, and it will be wise and we will be happy if it will help the people, because this virus is killing people.
I'm happy because the government is a step forward, understand? We waited so long. The government is showing us that it is doing something for us, understand? The health workers, frontline workers, have been deprived, they're exhausted. You see, they're working under terrible conditions. I think now they'll be relieved.
The South African government has been criticized for its slow response in acquiring vaccines, but the arrival of this first consignment brings hope that the country can finally turn the tide on this virus that has ravished the country. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's move on now. Ever since the Ethiopian government announced that it will be liberalizing the country's telecom sector in 2019, there has been a flurry of interest from players all around the globe looking to capitalize on this previously untapped market. Well, Airtel Africa, however, has decided to take a different approach. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
Airtel Africa's CEO has ruled his company out of the running for a telecoms license in the much-coveted Ethiopian market. The telecoms firm wants to focus its energies on the 14 countries it has already invested in.
We have a lower market share in Nigeria, Congo, DRC, Tanzania and Kenya. And our entire current focus is on these countries in order to grow. We are not looking at bidding for Ethiopia at this stage.
Its Nigerian subsidiary has collected national identity numbers from nearly half of its customers. This is part of a process to adhere to regulator demands to add valid national identification numbers to every SIM card registered in the country.
People are also very clear and very conscious that they need to keep their mobile number, and they're trying to get their national identity numbers registered. So all this is, but I do believe that this could may require a little more time, and we may not be able to complete the full exercise. In which case, after all efforts, if we don't manage by February 9th, then we will, I'm sure, discuss with the government and request for some extension.
After Airtel Kenya's merger with Telkom fell through, the company has invested on expanding its rural network as a way to compete with market leader Safaricom.
What was the thinking behind the merger was, instead of two small players trying to compete with Safaricom, the giant, we would combine resources and pool and do it. But for whatever reason, that has not happened. So we on our own have started investing. We have a much stronger balance sheet as Airtel Africa. So we have gone ahead and invested in solo on our own to compete with Safaricom. As you know, we've been consistently gaining market share over the last few years, and we are going quite handsomely in Kenya on our own.
The company still sees voice as crucial to growth in the future, as huge swaths of the continent are still underusing their phones as costs remain high. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And to some international news now. A new approach to trade is one of the many areas that U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to tackle. His predecessor, Donald Trump, renegotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement and started a trade war with China. Well, CGTN's Alastair Baverstock has more on where the U.S. is now heading.
After a tumultuous 4 years for free trade under President Trump, North America will now be trying to get back to business. Yet, so far, President Biden has not differed so much from his predecessor. The new administration's trade team has been stacked with familiar faces from Trump's North American Free Trade Agreement renegotiations.
I look forward to
including Catherine Tai as his top trade executive, a lawyer who was key not only in convincing Democrats to adopt the new USMCA, but also led the litigation of Washington's tariffs dispute with China at the World Trade Organization. Luis Rosano was a member of Mexico's team for those renegotiations and says the politicization of trade in recent years will have a long legacy.
The union leaders, traditionally Democrats, that they would really want to push forward their thinking within the USMCA, but you also have a more centrist President Biden that wants to recover the trust of blue-collar workers that most of them voted for Trump. That means that you have like the perfect storm coming on, because they will try to charge these political issues.
For Mexico, that means higher worker wages, the tightening of previously lax environmental regulations, and protecting workers' rights to unionize, the lack of such stipulations having been a major selling point for doing business in Mexico before. It's a hard line to enforce, and one which will mean new challenges for Mexico.
The new U.S. administration will prioritize the enforcement of the new agreements which Mexico negotiated. So Mexico will no longer be able to attract business through its lower factory wages. So the increased production costs here must be compensated with greater productivity. And if Mexico doesn't take on this challenge, it will result in companies leaving the country.
Indeed, just like Trump, bringing those jobs back to America will be one of President Biden's goals. But making that happen is more complicated than a free trade deal, even if the new arrangement favors the United States.
You can bring wealth, and you can bring technology, and you can bring, innovation. But actually, there are so many of those jobs that are fighting against automation and digitalization. But I think that these issues are going to be flying around for the next months, if not years.
As President Biden begins his administration with a closely guarded hand on international trade, analysts say Mexico may be facing 4 more years of the same trade policies. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, the level of debt in Ghana is just under 76% of GDP, and that's raised concern about the country's debt sustainability. We'll be talking about this and much more at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thank you so much, Uche. Well, you are watching Africa Live. We'll have more news for you after this short break.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
A global art project known as Beyond Walls has made its way to Cape Town. Artist Sape uses his work to break the chains of political and social norms around the world. He chose South Africa to be part of his latest project based on its past and the hope that it represents, despite disparities that still exist. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
A striking black and white mural on Cape Town's Sea Point promenade brought a much-needed break from South Africa's tedious lockdown. It was one of 3 installations depicting a chain of human hands by French-Swiss artist Sape, bringing a message of hope.
The goal of the project is to create the biggest human chain, so it's a traveling project. We go to city to city, and the idea is to make it happen for several years and to connect more and more people all around the world.
Renowned as a pioneer for linking street art and land art, Sape worked with local artists to bring the eco-friendly artworks to life.
The first time we talked about this project was exactly a year ago, in January 2020. And for the past 6 months, a team of about 50 people in South Africa has been busy. And it goes from permits to drones to sourcing the material. So it's a lot of preparation, and the better the preparation, the quicker the work.
Someone that's well known like Sape comes to these communities, puts a piece into communities with the kids. That's when this place will get recognized. That's when people will start paying attention to the infrastructure that these kids are staying by. And then they'll compare to a place maybe like Sea Point.
Beyond Walls project has reached over 30 cities across the world, including Berlin, Geneva and Paris. South Africa's rich history and its colorful townships attracted the artists to the mother city.
For sure, with the black story of apartheid in South Africa, I wanted to see that, with my own eyes. But I can say that I was very moved However, you know, in the township, the people are so warm. Okay, we know that it's dangerous. We know that there's some insecurity, but when, you know, we arrived and all the people got the arms open to welcome us, and it was one of my best experiences in my life.
Saipe's social activism has earned him global recognition. He's modest about being picked by Forbes magazine as one of the most influential people in the world under 30.
I really trust that art can serve humanity and change some lines, you know, remove some lines in a social system or in a political system. So I really trust that we can change the world using art. It's an honor to be known by Forbes. I'm more proud about what I can do in reality.
This gigantic work of art has now faded, but its powerful message lives on, inviting people to show kindness to one another and to live peacefully. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
The first rehearsal for China's Spring Festival Gala has been completed. The program, presented by China Media Group, is broadcast annually on Chinese New Year's Eve. This year includes some changes, however, especially in the way people interact due to the coronavirus pandemic. This includes online participation. For decades, watching the show has been a ritual for families across the country and abroad as they celebrate China's most popular holiday. Well, the Spring Festival in China, also known as the Lunar New Year, is usually a time for travel. But with restrictions in place to curb the spread of COVID-19, Beijing residents are turning to more local activities this winter. Nkongi reports.
Snow might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about China, but the country is now home to more ski resorts than Europe, and winter sports have seen a surge in popularity in recent years.
I think it's pretty good. When I first started, I thought it was hard, but after a while, I can at least get down the slope.
I came by myself. They said snowboarding is fun, and I tried skiing when I was younger, so I'm trying this.
I brought my kid today to ski. He prefers being outdoors.
These are just a few of the millions who flock to China's slopes each year. Wu Bin is the vice chairman of the Beijing Ski Association.
I'm a skier and a snowboarder.
He says across the country, the number of ski resorts has increased over the past 5 years.
More than 60%. And the skier visits in China, it's double from 10 million increase to more than 20 million.
This means not only more facilities, but also more jobs around the country.
The number of skiers hasn't stopped going up, and the development of snow sports means more people involved in the industry.
It took us just over an hour to drive here from central Beijing, and we're in an area known for one of the most famous stretches of the Great Wall.
What makes this area even more special, though, is it's home to many of the venues that will be hosting next year's Winter Olympic Games.
With the Games set to open in almost exactly a year's time, there's growing excitement from those on the slopes.
I'm paying more attention because my school has been organizing activities.
We live quite close, so we'd definitely like to go.
Go China! I hope the world's attention can turn again to China. We can do it.
Nicole Ng, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news.